Hello, sir.
Hello.
How
Do you
are
hear
you?
me?
I can hear you very well.
Perfect. I
So
picked
there's
I picked a spot where hopefully the connection doesn't fail and we still get a good view over the Kamptal.
that's amazing. Great. And I imagine you have to be kind of high up for that.
Relatively high up. Guess it's about 320 meters where we are now.
All right.
I mean, the Kamptal itself is not extremely highly elevated, as opposed to some wine growing areas in South America, for example. But that's also, historically speaking, the Kamptal is well over 1,000 years of wine culture now. So for everybody else who's watching, Kamptal, northeast of Austria, it's where we
Okay.
are today. So
So
I'll
I want to.
show
Oh
you
God.
around.
I want to
So
back.
what we're seeing here is the whole Kamptal pretty much.
That's just amazing. And we're probably gonna. I'm gonna probably ask you to go back to that a couple times because people come in and out on these. So in 15 minutes, it may be a whole new audience. So can we start, Ludwig, by introducing yourself? I visited your mom and dad in 2013, and I think you were in school. I can't remember because you were not there, but they were lovely, and I've always had your wine on my list, and I've not met you yet. So can you tell us your story with wine?
Yes. Well, 2013, when you were here, I was studying abroad. So that's why we probably didn't meet. I was studying in Madrid at that time. And well, the winery itself is, old family tradition. We are the fifth generation, my brother and I. We're in the middle of taking over right now, which is always an interesting time to see, you know, two generations try to work out a way together. But so far so good. Potentially you later feel the tension in the wines. No, we're working well together. And well, the time when you were here exactly was still without me or my brother in the winery. And now we are about 160 years into our family winemaking, coming from originally leather tanning, which, yeah, due to a lucky coincidence from the marriage of my great great grandparents, happened to turn into winemaking as my great great grandmother, so the female side, brought the vineyards into the family. And that grew into over the past 160 years. So that was 1856 when the winery was officially founded. Grew into about 30 hectares winery, which on an international scale is small. On a personal scale, it's way too big to do it alone. But it's great. So I think we reached the size where we don't really want to go too much further. It's a size where you can still be part of every process, and we see winemaking very much as a craft where you work with your hands, where you work with your mind, and going bigger and bigger will only make it more difficult to follow what we really love doing. And
Yeah.
love is making wine and not making a business that's, I don't know, 150 hectares big. That's not, I don't think that's the love that
That's a lot.
we're following. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not the aspiration. So stay relatively small and keep working up to our tradition.
So can you explain, and you started to, but kind of given, because there's people here, I have a friend actually in Vienna right now. Explain where you are, like Austrian wine in general, and then where you are particularly, and how your family winery might be different in your region.
So we are. I'll show you the vineyard where I'll tell you this.
Okay.
We are situated in Langenlois. So Langenlois is the center of the Kamptal appellation. Don't think of Austrian wine growing regions in the same way as you think of most other wine growing regions internationally. It's relatively small structured. So the Kamptal itself is about 4,000 hectares. Don't ask me how that translates into acres. I know you
Now,
calculate in acres. But we are, so to say, on the southern side of Langenlois, where I'm walking to right now.
okay.
And the building itself, where we are making wine, was built in the 1830s, around 1830s. And my great grandfather used to make wine on the opposite side of that building, and then
Okay.
he bought where we are making the wine today. And so, in terms of climate, we are a cool climate area. So put that in perspective, that doesn't mean that we don't have hot summers. We are situated in the center of Europe, so that means we have continental climate, which means, I mean, today it's not too hot. Today we have 20 degrees.
Okay.
But in summer it can get up to 35 degrees on some days, which is hot. But then on the other side, in winter, up to -20. And
Wow.
the interesting thing about where we are is the differences between day and night, because continental climate means hot days and cool nights. And that makes a great combination for white wine growing. And so what you see here now is, so to say, the southern side of the Kamptal, where it slowly transitions into this relatively flat area following the Danube downstream towards Vienna. And in the far background, I don't know how well you see it here.
Uh-huh.
You can see the Alps.
Okay.
And turning here, we would have across the hill, we would have our neighbors, the Kremstal, and go a little bit further, about where my finger is right now, the beginning of the Wachau. So
Okay.
that's what I mean. Small structured. It's, so to say, the wine growing areas, Kamptal, Kremstal, Wachau, Dreisental, and Wagram. It's under the umbrella of the Danube region. So
Mhm.
we're tributary valleys, and it's the Danube region.
Okay. So how is Kamptal different from the other region?
The Kamptal is different so the Kamptal itself is the coolest region of those three going towards the Wachau.
Okay.
Meaning we're talking about minor differences, but the Danube itself, so the Wachau, for example, is a valley carved out by the Danube. Danube itself. It's a relatively big water, big river, which
Mm-hmm.
moderates the climate. And that means that it doesn't get as warm during the day, but it also doesn't get as cold during the day. And so I think that's making the main differences between the wines. For example, here, let's put it into a bigger perspective again. In the Danube area, we can focus on, getting relatively ripe grapes.
Mm-hmm.
Since it's a cool vegetation period, we have long ripening seasons. So usually harvest starts in mid-September, occasionally in late September, and occasionally, like 2 years ago, also in end of August, which was the earliest vintage recorded. But that
Wow.
means that we get relatively low sugar levels while still having very great aromatic ripeness. And also the acidity is not dropping too low. And I think those are some main characteristics of the wines that you will
Yeah.
find here, is that they have a beautiful ripe taste. It's ripe fruit, very ripe fruit. You can go into extremes of, almost like red wine, like white wines that we can also produce here, which are harvested in October or November, but
Mm-hmm.
still with a very nice natural acidity, which gives the wines also extreme longevity.
Yeah.
And that, I think that's what makes the wines from our area stand out to many other regions. Yeah? And we're focusing here on Grüner Veltliner and Riesling. And the reason why we have that is, so as I walk here, I'm standing on the northern side of the valley, which
Mm-hmm.
is everything that you see here. And then you see over here,
Uh-huh.
which is our most famous vineyard called the Heiligenstein,
Yeah.
with the little brother, the Geisberg. So those are, this is mm, the last border, so to say, of the so-called Bohemian geological formation. So
Okay.
everything that you see here. And the Bohemian geological formation, which ends just right here in front of Langenlois, with this mountain over here, the Mannhardsberg, it's pure metamorphic rock. So
Okay.
metamorphic rock means in our cases gneiss, granite, slate, quartz, and fibolite. So it's very diverse. We mainly grow Riesling because it's dry. Yeah, and Riesling is reactive to, botrytis. It can, since it has small bunches, it can cope very well with dryness, and harder growing conditions. Whereas Grüner Veltliner on the other side is grown mostly on the southern side of the valley, where we have the so-called less soils. It's
Okay.
an alpine formation. It's mineral dust, so to say. It comes directly from the Alps, eroded throughout the ice ages, crushed under the weight of ice age glaciers, and then carried throughout this part of Europe with the wind. And they are very porous. You can imagine they're like sponges almost,
Oh,
and dusty sponges. If they're dry and you pick them up, they like pure dust. If you no,
crumble it.
destroy it, crumble it exactly with your fingers. And those are ideal soils for Grüner Veltliner, and that's why Grüner Veltliner has become so popular in the north of Austria, because we have so much of less soils. Uh, because Grüner Veltliner has a more vigorous growth, it has bigger bunches, it's much more dependent on a good water supply and good nutrients, just because of the same reason. And
Mm.
so that's how we, over the last 100 years especially, the evolution went away from field plants. So till 100 years ago, still everything, most of the vineyard, not every vineyard, but most of the vineyards were field plants. And today we have Grüner and Riesling as our main indigenous varieties. And I say Riesling is also indigenous here in this area, yeah? Not only in Germany, but it's been here for almost as long as it has been cultivated in some parts of Germany. Yeah, and a very different style though that we make here.
Yeah. I wanna ask you about that, but before we do, uh, Becky Sue Epstein had asked about the vinifera grapes can survive 20 degrees below. Do you have to hill up or something to protect if it gets that cold?
It depends on how long that period lasts. Nowadays, it's very rare that a period where you have minus 20 degrees lasts longer than a couple days, 2, 3 days maybe, at max. And if it would last, let's say, a week of minus 20 degrees, there would be a risk that some vines would just die. Yeah, so they would just freeze. It would freeze too far into the soil, and pop up. But in the case that you have between -15, -20 degrees Celsius, and you have strong vines like those old vines where I'm walking right now, it's not a problem. So that nothing will happen. So
Wow.
it's more problematic if it happens later in the year, let's say like March, end of March, and then you would have a little bit of juice going into the stem already, yeah. And if cold, then the same would happen, yeah. You would pop up, but
Gotcha.
yes,
That
no,
makes sense.
usually it's not a problem. And now, right now, we have the beginning of flowering.
Oh.
You see?
Yeah.
And here where I'm walking, this is Grüner Veltliner.
Okay.
This is one of our oldest vineyards. That's about 80 years of age, I can see. And
Beautiful.
that's what we also try to preserve, those very old
Yeah.
vines, because they yield exceptionally great fruit. Right now, I think we will get a bit of a smaller vintage. And
Right.
depending, they said it's gonna rain more this week, so depending on how much it's gonna rain, probably, which is not necessarily bad. And usually they tend to be a bit more loose berried anyways, those
Okay.
those old vines. And they make very dense, very uh, calm, flowing style of wine, which we like. So what we try to make, and what I'm also trying to make, is what also my ancestors have tried to do, to get an expression of where it comes from,
Mm-hmm.
and to make calm flowing wines that are not too much characterized by their fruit that jumps out, especially if I talk about, vines of this age, but rather by, marked by place. And that for me, if I can make that, that's 100 points for me. So
Yeah.
that's all we're trying to do.
So I always feel that your family's wines are just a little bit richer than a lot. Is that a regional thing or a soil thing or a family style?
Uh, I think it's a family style, and it's also it's also history based. There was a time, I'm sure you most people heard of it in Austria. We had a wine scandal, which
Yep.
was at that time problematic, but at the same time, from today's perspective, looking back, one of the best things that could happen. But it's cool climate. That means that now with climate change, which also obviously affects us, it's warming up a little bit. But before that time, it used to be a bit more, even more acid-driven wines, much more acid-driven wines actually than we get today, which was to some extent even, I think for many people too much. But the Austrian taste is sour. We don't like
Mm-hmm.
sweet wines, so we want dry wines. But at that time, people tried to get richer and richer wines, which unfortunately for some people led to using or doing that with chemicals,
Right.
which in the end enabled us to put in work the most, um, say the strictest wine law that exists, which right now just enables us to produce very high quality wines all over Austria. But from this time it comes that people started working with botrytis, because ripeness as we have it today was not necessarily a given thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so people started working with botrytis to get a little bit more ripeness into the wines. And this is something that my family kept on making actually. And so I think part of the style that we are known for is a combination of, you know, what my ancestors always used to do, and what nature is giving us right now. We've come to a point where botrytis is, so to say, you have to think twice now if you want botrytis, because it's making very ripe wines. So for the single vineyards, I was starting with 2016, 17 when I started taking over the cellar. I'm working with out botrytis, or with barely a very, very, very little botrytis, something that I don't want to get rid of it entirely, but it's below 3%, so you won't feel it anyways. And that made the wines, they're still rich because we macerate a long time on the skin.
Okay.
So when we pick the grapes, we de-stem all of them and we crush them, and that makes part of the meat that most people, I think, refer to when they taste our wines, that they feel a bit richer. And
Gotcha.
the other part is the history, I would say, and that creates the Hiedler style. So it's a mix of couple generations of experience with what nature gives us and how we like to drink.
Wow, that's really fascinating about the botrytis. I had not heard that before. So, do you grow just Riesling and Gruner, or other grapes? And then, can you tell us your different cuvées and how maybe 2 or 3 different Gruners are different?
No, we're growing actually quite a few different varieties. Grüner Veltliner obviously is our most important variety. Then we also, and Riesling our second most important. Both of them together make around 80% of our total wine production, which is a little bit above 200,000 bottles a year. And the remaining 20% are split between Weißburgunder, so Pinot Blanc internationally. We call it Weißburgunder, which is also for us a very historic variety because my grandfather at his time was the first to plant it here in the whole Danube area. That was in 1955. And then we have Chardonnay, which is also an important variety. We also have some Pinot Noir. We have some Zweigelt, only a little bit. We have some Sangiovese. We're growing one of the northernmost Sangioveses in Europe. I think there's a colleague in the Mosel area who is having the most or the northernmost, and I think we're now the second in place in terms of latitude. Yeah, and then we are pretty much at the end. Muscat Ottonel, which I think is a variety that you've never heard of.
No.
It's a very old variety that we started recultivating about 10 years ago, which belongs to the same family as Gelber Muscatella, basically all those Muscat wine. And so that's the varieties we work with. So as you see, it's mostly white wine varieties. It's about 95% white wine. And it doesn't look like we're going to change a lot, even though obviously climate change is slowly warming up here, the climate, but so far it benefited us, I would say. I think maybe now is the point where we can discuss, okay, where is the benefit in terms of what style does the climate allow you to make?
Mm-hmm. So
here's
you're different,
more Grüner Veltliner flowering.
and different are just vineyard driven, or blends, or how are your different cuvées?
Um, we don't really make cuvées. The only cuvée we make is a red wine blend, which is
Okay.
called Liubisa. And Liubisa is the, so to say, the old name of Langenlois that the first Celtic settlers gave to this area. So this was once settled by the Celts who already grew vines here, I think. But
Wow.
then the Romans really brought the wine culture. They were, on the opposite side of the Danube, which is 10 kilometers air distance from here,
Okay.
is where they had the last, so the end of the Roman Empire, so to say. And Liubisa, back to the wine, is a blend of Pinot Noir and Sangiovese. And it came into existence because my father, when he was about my age, a bit younger, he worked in Italy at the winery that you might know, Isole Olena.
Uh-huh.
And there he fell in love with Sangiovese,
Wow.
and he made a deal with the winemaker that he would come the next year to help pruning, and he just
Hmm.
took home some of the, of the cuts. He grafted
Oh,
them here. That's how the Sangiovese
wow.
came to Langenlois, and he planted them hidden behind an old cellar. And back in that time, there was no, you still today, you're not allowed to grow Sangiovese here. It's not
Uh-huh.
permitted as quality variety. And so he actually thought of, blending it with something,
Uh-huh.
and where he don't have to declare what it is. And so he just made a blend called Liubisa, which was with his first plantations of Pinot Noir. It's about 35 years ago, and Sangiovese.
Wow.
So that's
That's
the
very
only
cool.
cuvee we have. All the other stuff is making single varieties. We do make mostly single vineyards too.
Right.
Like right here, I'm on Käferberg where I'm walking around, which is a very well-known Grüner Veltliner site. And uh, other than that, we make a couple vineyard blends, but that's, I would say, pretty
Okay.
normal. So
So
what you
we're
see
at
here,
the
for example, is a hail net, hail protection.
oh, oh, that's awesome. I got you. Okay. Well, good. I'm glad you have that.
And
Listen,
that's
we're
Pinot Noir.
almost at the well at the half hour mark. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but can you talk about just briefly a couple of the different vineyards and maybe a food, a local like an Austrian food you might put with the wine?
Um, well, here in Austria, it really depends on the wine. If you get the richer style of Grüner Veltliner, for example, it's almost like you know a substitute for red wine. And
Okay.
so we couple that with meat, mostly a bit heavier dishes, also heavier in taste. Uh, can be fatty, so can have a lot of taste, coupled with a lot of taste. But most of our wines are obviously on the lighter side. Most
Mhm.
of our wines are, they have a bit more acidity and freshness, and those go well if I talk about Grüner Veltliner now, especially with all sorts of vegetables.
Yeah.
With you can do it with all sorts of um, lentils, potatoes, everything that comes from underground. That couples well with this earthy herbal back taste that you get in Grüner Veltliner so many times. It goes well with cold meats
Yeah.
and also some smoked fish. So that's what we like to couple it with, which is very typical cuisine from the Heurigen, so the Heurigen culture that we
Hmm.
have here.
Which is that starts is just during the summer, the Horriger?
The Heuriger throughout the entire year, but mostly you enjoy it during the summer. Example here You have something called Kellergasse. And the Kellergasse is, so to say, a little street, usually very old, where you have just a bunch of cellars. And that was, so to say, where all the historic winemaking happened. So you had a bunch of cellars right at the vineyard, right at the source. And so people wouldn't have to walk too far, with their horses to get in the grapes and process everything. And it's a bit over 200 years now, I think. The emperor of Maria Theresia of Austria, she enacted a law. Is that the correct English word?
Yep.
She made a law that allowed those little winemakers to sell their produce. And so they started selling their produce, and they were allowed to only sell what they made themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so they made their own meats, they grew their own vegetables. Obviously, they sold their own wine. And that's how the tradition of Heuriger really started. And this is where people come over the summer. You're sitting outside in the vineyard, you have a beautiful view, you get extremely nice food. You shouldn't be a vegetarian in that case. There's only very few Heurigens that have a great vegan or vegetarian option,
Right.
which is, just a historic thing. I wouldn't mind if they had more, but obviously they always had their own pigs, their animals, and so they cured their own meat. They had their own stuff, and that's what people, spent their money on back in the day and still do today.
Wow. So, just to wrap up, then, is Austria back open after the coronavirus, and are the Heuriger gonna be back to normal soon?
Austria right now is open. So even from today on, we don't even have to wear masks in supermarkets anymore. The Heurigens are open. I think, well, I'm not too sure. I don't want to tell any lies. I'm not sure what restrictions they have to follow right now in the Heurigens, but I think outside it's not a problem anyways how many people sit together and how close to each other they sit, because usually it's quite normal to have 1 meter in between, two tables.
Yeah.
So life is pretty much back to normal here. Unfortunately, in the sense that it was actually quite nice for me when it was so calm. If you take away the economical challenges of that time, but people still bought a lot of wine. I think they were kind of depressed sitting at home, so they just bought heaps of wine. We sold quite a bit through our online shop. Obviously, gastronomy at that time was like zero, and now gastronomy is getting also back to normal, so same as the Heurigen. And you will have to see how it develops now in the next couple of days, weeks. But they're expecting a second wave, so I'm not too sure what will happen.
Yeah.
Hard to say. Right now it's looking good, and I'm optimistic.
I hope so. Well, I'll let you go. It is a pleasure to chat with you and spend some time talking. I'm glad to finally meet you, and hopefully we'll see you over here soon.
Hopefully, when the airports are open again.
Exactly.
Thank you, Jack. It was
so
nice to talk to you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Say hi to your parents for me, okay?
I will.
All right. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.